Hello, everyone. Brie Sodano here, and today we are doing an extra special podcast, and this is a masterclass on an advanced money mindset topic around judgments. So today we will be here a little bit longer than usually. Usually my podcasts are very, pretty short, but I think today we'll probably be here between 40 minutes to an hour. And so what you're going to learn today is basically the way that I see judgments when I'm working with clients, how they interact in our psyche, our emotions, our body. And we're going to go through how to identify how judgments will actually jam up your money flow. A lot of the results that clients get when working with me is the result of working on their judgments. And so this is super, super juicy, super, super powerful and advanced. This is a little bit more advanced. So if you've never done any mindset work, which I would say if you're listening to my 100th and something episode, that's probably not you. But if I'm a little over your head, just listen again. All right. But this is a little bit more of an advanced class and we're about to get into it. So I hope you enjoy and get something out of it. All right. So let's start with what judgments are. Yeah, that's where we're going to get started. So judgments are a mental structure that will essentially, in the mental realm, they kind of stop the flow of energy and they help us to know how to behave. So judgments are mental structures that really dictate behavior. And I want to point this out because like a limiting belief is going to be more about what's possible in the world, right? It's going to be like, oh, I could make that kind of money. I couldn't make that kind of money. I could do this sort of thing. Even if we have limiting beliefs on ourself, actually most of the time those are judgments anyways. A judgment is going to be about more how I behave, right? And so the purpose of a judgment is for us to have good judgment, is for us to create safety physically, socially, and emotionally. And I want to point out here that social safety and emotional safety are very much intertwined to how we behave. Physical safety, I'll tell you, when it comes to money, I almost never see a physical safety judgment in the way. Like literally not yet in my practice. Although I'm sure it's possible, I just haven't seen it. Because it's just less common, right? Very likely, I'm not going to tell you to go do something physically dangerous to your actual body to make money, right? Maybe if I was like a skateboarding coach, that might be something where those kinds of judgments would be more in the way, right? But for what I do, it's very rare that comes up. But social safety, when we're feeling socially excluded, so that could be like the energies of shame, right? Shame is a social emotion. The same place in our brain that tingles when we're feeling socially excluded or in pain socially, it actually triggers our pain receptors. And the same thing for emotions. These levels of safety are really important to us, even though they seem like they're not actually dangerous. So it will register in your brain as a real threat, even though there's not a physical threat there most of the time. So the thing to know about judgments is that they're like little mental walls and they stop the flow of energy. I'm going to show you mental and emotional realms. So if you were ever talking to somebody and you're having a discussion and you can watch when your words hit the wall in their mind, and you know that everything that you just said did not matter to them, that information didn't cross that wall. That's a grounded experience of what I'm talking about. When it comes to social or emotional, most of the time, we're gonna really see that in our behaviors. This is always my silly example that I use, but if I was to tell you to steal a can of tuna fish, if I was to be like, the secret to all of your abundance and things that you want is to go into Walmart and steal a can of tuna, chances are you're probably cringing right now. Chances are you probably already feel a little bit bad in your body. And that's what will happen when we need to take actions that are on the wrong side of our judgments, right? So a couple more things about judgments is humans hate to be on the wrong side of their own judgment, like more than anything. And when we are on the wrong side of our judgment, we will feel guilty or we will justify. And I want to point out here too, is that judgments can be at different sizes. So you may have a judgment that's a little bit of more like a curb, where it's something it does create barrier, but it's something that could be easily maneuvered through, right? So let's just say like I have a judgment where I like to be on time, right? But I prefer to be on time and I do my best to be on time. But if I'm late, I'm actually probably going to feel a little bit bad, but I'm not going to be so in my judgment that I wouldn't show up late, or I would show up 2 hours early to ensure that I wasn't late, right? So that judgment is small, right? It's a little judgment. I could hop over it at this point in my life. I could choose to be late for something if I wanted to, right? I could be like, oh, I don't want to go to that party right now. I'll go in an hour. I'll be late, right? Then we have some judgments that are more like a Jersey barrier, where again, you can hop over it, but this time it takes a little bit more work, a little bit more effort, and that barrier is going to do more than, to keep you in line than, let's say, a curb, right? And then we have some judgments that are more like the Great Wall of China, where they're so old or deep in our reality that we may not even recognize that that's a wall. We may just believe that it was like the end of this kind of reality. And most of us have some of those kinds of judgments. So in today's podcast, I'm going to talk about how to hop over the smaller judgments. We're going to talk about that toward the end. And sometimes you'll need to work with a coach or practitioner. So while I'm going to give you as much as I can give you in this masterclass, there are some things that if you wanted to work with me on these things, you'd have to work with me. This is one of the special little things that I do, but I'm going to give you guys the inside, the behind the scenes, and as much as you could execute on your own, from a masterclass, right? So this is like the basics of judgment. So when I'm listening to people talk, when I'm listening to my clients, I will hear their words bump up against their judgments. Now, the reason why this is so important is because on the identity level, judgments actually are less helpful on the identity level. They often just cut us off from our power, from whatever power that we would have on the other side of our judgment. And I'll explain this in a second. In the emotional body, the judgments are also really, really unhelpful. What happens is emotions get stored and stuck in our emotional body. On the social level, the judgments really do keep us, they're there to keep us safe. And in a lot of ways and shapes, they do, right? And on the physical level, judgments are also generally pretty awesome. Like when your judgment is like, no, don't take your bike down that super steep, rocky hill. That would be an example of a judgment. So let's talk about this. So judgments on the identity level. Each of us has an identity, and this is who we believe we are, right? And so another thing that I will say is humans hate to be incongruent with who we believe we are, which is actually just being on the wrong side of our judgment. So where this can cause some problems is that these judgments create what's called the shadow, right? And so if you've ever read anything about Carl Jung, he talks about the shadow self. And basically the shadow self is the parts of ourselves that are denied, that are rejected, right? So let's just say I have a judgment that goes up that I am generous, but I'm not greedy, right? And if I was to do anything that would make me feel greedy, I'm going to be real cringy, right? I'm not going to want to do that. I'm not going to want to charge full price. I'm not going to, I'm going to want to over deliver, right? I'm going to want to undercharge or deliver, right? Now, for me to be greedy is going to feel real bad. And if somebody was to call me greedy, I would want to defend myself, right? Or if I did something that was greedy, they're going to feel guilty about it, or I'm going to justify. Where this creates problem is that it often leads us to be out of balance. The thing is that we were never not greedy. It just will end up coming out sideways, right? So this might look like I'm generous. I overgive to the point where then I'm resentful, I'm bitter, and unconsciously I'm taking from you. Where even in the physical realm, I might be giving something to you. In the unconscious realm, I might be taking your power, or I might be taking your choice, or I might be, having strings attached, right? And we've all been in these sorts of interactions where something looks generous, but we know that it's not. And so that sort of hesitation where I'm talking about here is it just means that I'm out of balance. And so I can't come to the interaction because I would be on the wrong side of my own judgment. And so that greedy side of me, that receptive side of me has to come out sideways. That's really what happens. So I'm going to give you an example here. So I was working with a client who was having a lot of what I would call a revenue roller coaster. So what would happen was he hated to do sales. He hated to do marketing. And when his money got really low, he would go ahead and do all of those activities, and then his money would come up, right? And so he would start to see the money come in. But once he had enough money that he couldn't justify doing those things that he hated, right? Once he couldn't justify being on the wrong side of his own judgment around sales and marketing, his revenue would go back down, and then, the cycle would start again. So his revenue was really up and down, and he could essentially hold enough money to pay his office, to pay his staff, but he could not hold enough money to pay himself. Right. And this was essentially why he hired me. And we looked at those judgments that he had. And so really, we started, another thing about judgments, I'm going to just point out here as I carry on with this story, is that the easiest way to see your own judgments is to be looking outward through the world, because the judgments that you judge other people for are not about them. It's your mental structure. So what's basically happening is you're noticing to yourself, oh, they're on the wrong side of my judgment. It's not about them. They're not good or bad or right or wrong. They just happen to be on the right or the wrong side of your judgment. So if you see somebody and you feel like you approve of them or you like them, and what I also want to point out is sometimes judgments, even on the good side, even if you judge somebody to be in your approval or be good or be awesome or whatever, that same wall goes up, and oftentimes that can be damaging also, because you're not seeing the whole truth of a person. You're just seeing about them what's on the side of your judgment that you're willing to look at. Anyway, so this client had judgments that this other business owner in town was always self-promoting. He was such a douchebag, and I could see, I was like, all right, so you judge him for self-promotion. You judge him for selling. You judge him for being successful, right? And so all of these things, in this fella's dichotomy, it was like the good guy, the nice, like the good guy and this douchebag. And so he was willing to be this good guy, but was unwilling to be what he called this douchebag. This judgment cost him many, many thousands of dollars a month. Actually, the first month that we broke this judgment, his revenue literally doubled. And I want to just point this out because he was already there. He was already doing the work. What was in the way was his ability to sell, feel good selling, like feel proud of himself selling. And once that judgment went away and he was able to do those things with gusto, the money was there the whole time. You know what I mean? Like, it looks like magic, but the money was there the entire time. So it's just like he wouldn't do the things required to get the money. Well, anyways, so this is how, right? So this is how the judgments on the identity level will impact things. So where he was unwilling to be the douchebag, the bad guy, he was only willing to be the nice guy, right? And so the nice guy doesn't self-promote and the nice guy doesn't do it this way. And then, and I see this with women too, a good girl conditioning, right? But men have conditioning too. So anyways, this particular client was, most of the time I work with ladies, but this particular client was a man. So when we balanced that judgment, the action that he was required to take stopped feeling terrible, right? He didn't have to justify it. He didn't have to feel guilty. And if you show up to a sales call feeling guilty, if you're selling a service, but you feel guilty about it, what are you going to, you're going to repel your customers because it's gross. So when he could show up and see that it was actually an act of service. So look, I'm going to show you the mental, the little ping pong game we play here. So when I start to ask the questions, what we're doing here is we're adding for mental flexibility. All right. So when I'm coaching somebody, we're trying to get their mind to loosen up a little bit. So the mind can go on both sides of the judgment, and judgments are often very dual, right? And so when we start to do this, we're trying to kind of get to a place of non-dual thinking. We're trying to get to the place where we can see that him being the nice guy was actually being the douchebag, and him being the douchebag, or him doing these things he judged as being the douchebag, was actually the nice guy. So what we're doing is we're trying to get him to occupy all of the space of his identity around this topic, rather than only having access to half of his identity. So we start to play, and I was like, all right, well, is it really like a good guy thing to have gone to school for so long to be able to help people and then not tell them about it? Like, are you the good guy when you're letting people suffer or go to other practitioners when actually what they really need is the thing that you sell, right? And so you can start to see that the thing that he thought was the good guy thing in the shadows is actually less awesome than you'd think, right? And I was like, all right. And if you don't pay yourself, right? So he's thinking he's self-sacrificing. He's thinking like he's so good and righteous and working so hard and not even taking a salary, right? And I was like, all right, well, if you don't pay yourself, then are you going to burn out? And he's like, yeah, of course. And I was like, okay. And does that make you, like, do you think that makes you like good to deprive all of these people service, to deprive yourself? Like, does that make you like better? And he's like, well, when you say it like that, no, it doesn't. So we start to play with these judgments, and we start to see that the things that he's doing that he thinks makes him the good guy are actually like not all that awesome. That in not doing sales and in not showing up, he's actually not serving people. right? And so we start to break down these judgments by balancing them out. And so the point of this is to get your fingerprints on the wall of that, like on that mental wall, and then eventually for it to come down. And what ends up happening when you can be both sides of something, this is the place where you can have balance. Right? When we have a judgment that sits on our identity, what ends up happening is we're going to be out of power and out of balance. And we're going to be showing up in the unconscious, shadowy ways that we can't really see. So the shadow of this example here was that this fellow wasn't bringing home like money, right? And so a lot of the financial responsibility of the house was falling on other people, on his spouse, on his parents, on parents-in-law. The whole family was like supporting, and it was just because he like kind of wouldn't do it. But on top of it, he was still working and still being out of the house and still coming home tired and exhausted. So this good guy conditioning had him overgiving, not receiving enough, putting that burden onto other people. And you start to really look at the holistic situation and you're like, it's not really as awesome as it looks, right? And it's not about making him the bad guy in my coaching session. It's just about seeing the whole truth of it, right? And so when we can see that the truth of it, and the same thing like being salesy, I'm like, well, then this guy's serving, the person he was judging, I was like, well, he's serving more clients than you're serving, and he's bringing home money to his family, and he's doing this, and he's able to give in the community, da 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 da. And so like you can start to see that the judgment there wasn't ever really useful, right? The truth. And in having it up, he was cutting off a lot of his power, right? So this is how judgments kind of play out at that identity level. And so when we're working with these, the way that I really like to play with it is really just opening up to the potential that there's good and there's bad on both sides of whatever judgment you're looking at, right? Because it's like judging the night. It's like the sun, the daytime and the nighttime. They both need to be there. They're both good. They're both bad, right? Like if you're out in the sun too hard, you could get a sunburn. And if you're out in the night, you could get lost. But if, you're out in the night, you could sleep. And if you're out in the daytime, you could play. And you can start to see that these judgments that we have are just arbitrary. But when they're up, they create the shadow, and they often will cut us off from our power. So that's judgments at the identity level. All right. So next we're going to talk about the emotion, the creating emotional safety. Now, emotional safety is emotional range, emotional safety is a huge topic. And when I'm working with clients, I will spend usually a good amount of time working with clients on expanding their emotional range. But judgments play a role here. So you'll have to watch for some of my other lessons and content around expanding the emotional range. Basically, we start to learn to judge our emotions when we're kids. So most of the time when we're kids, we're experiencing the world very present time. Little kids are fully in their feminine. They don't have the masculine part of their mind has not yet developed. And so that like civilized, that reasoning part doesn't exist yet. So if you've ever been with a small child who's like absolutely thrown themselves on the floor about the shape of the sandwich that you cut for them, then you know what I'm talking about. Because that intensity of emotion. And so as adults, we know that that's just a lot to hold, man. Like, it's just a lot when the kid is like wailing about, you're like, you asked me for this sandwich. And they're like, and you made it for me, you terrible mother. But anyways, so we learn when we're little kids that certain emotions are safe for us to have, and certain emotions, so if I was to say, oh, don't be angry, or go to your room when you're going to be like that, or don't, like if I see that, if me as the mother sees that emotion as something that's like too much or whatever, and I treat that child in a way where literally sometimes, like I'm like, we do it in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's sweet and gentle, like, oh, here's a popsicle, cheer up. Sometimes it's like, we'll stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Sometimes it's like, you have to go away. So basically we learn when we're kids that that attachment to our parents is critical for our survival. Is critical. Like if you were to become unattached from your parents, you literally couldn't survive. And your little, baby human brain is like, oh, all right. So if I feel this way, I lose my attachment. If I feel this way, I lose my like loving connection to my mom or to my dad. And that's terrifying to a kid. So we start to learn to judge emotion. So we start to say, all right, well, it's okay if I'm this happy, but it's not okay if I'm 10 out of 10 happy. And we add a judgment there. And then we add up that bumper. It's like a bumper from like a bowling alley. We put that in. All right, well, I'm not allowed to feel angry. All right, well, I'm not allowed to feel spiteful. I'm not allowed to feel these certain kinds of ways. And so when we judge these feelings, again, those energetic walls go up. Now, in the emotional body, right? So I'm not talking about like our physical body here. I'm talking, we have different, we have our mental body, our physical body, our emotional body, our energetic body. And so those judgments, that energy basically will trap emotions that are judged, because it's like the emotions are made to move through. Energy in motion is an emotion. And what ends up happening is when we judge those feelings, they get stuck and then they compound. And what this might look like is, this is like a pretty common example. So let's just say somebody does something and it crosses my boundary a little bit and I'm mad about it. But I hadn't, let's say, clearly stated the boundary. So now I'm feeling a little guilty about being mad. And then I'm feeling annoyed with myself that I'm feeling guilty because I'm like, this anger is real, right? And so now I'm layering these emotions, right? And so when I judge that emotion of anger and I don't just let it move through, I don't just let myself have that anger. A lot of times I'll add compounding emotions, and they layer up. And now this one thing, instead of just feeling angry for the few seconds that it was going to take to have this anger move through and then go and address the situation, now I'm angry and guilty and annoyed and like second guessing myself, right? And you can see the way that this all happens. So the emotional side of judgment is we have to learn that our emotions are safe for us to have. For most of us, what this really, really means is that we have to learn how to not judge these emotions, so those walls are not there and the emotion can move through. But the more that we can meet ourselves in these high sensation experiences, the more that we're going to teach our brain and our body that we're safe. Like, we're safe to hold ourselves. And for most of us, this is a big skill to learn, right? And when we don't do it, our emotional body starts to get really cluttered, because when we have these judgments against emotions and that energy gets stored, what ends up happening is, our house just gets cluttered. Like sometimes people's emotional bodies, like when I look at them with my, like, I don't know, my energetic senses or whatever, it's like an episode of Hoarders. It's so crowded, there's not room to move. You couldn't really bring something new in until you get rid of the old stuff. And the older we get with having all of this like emotional baggage, the less maneuverability we have. So when I have a lot of judgment against my feelings, the way that I'm going to see this show up in life and in business and in money is that I'm going to essentially be too afraid to take certain actions, because if that emotion was to happen, one, I'm going to be on the wrong side of my judgment, and two, that emotion is not going to move through. So this is a really little gross metaphor, but just imagine, every day life serves us something. So just imagine your house, which I'm, in my metaphor here, your house is your emotional body. And every day Amazon comes and it brings you something, and some things you wanted and you like, and you maybe decorate your house with it. And sometimes you get a delivery that's terrible. Sometimes you get a delivery that's a hurt feeling, or a feeling of rejection or sadness or whatever. Now, if you know how to process those emotions, if you don't have big judgments there, what's going to happen is you're going to take that sadness in, or you're going to take that rejection in, and you're going to be with it for a minute, and you're going to experience what it's like to be rejected or to be sad or to be angry. And then it's going to move on through. So you're going to throw the box away. You're going to integrate what you need to integrate, and it's going to go away. So it's not that big of a deal, right? Like if you got a package that you don't like, you just throw it away. It's not a big deal. Where we have a lot of judgments is that when that package gets delivered and then we can't get rid of it. So it's stuck in our field forever. So just imagine you get a bad gift from Amazon, and all of a sudden it's got to stay on your mantle forever. You don't have the ability to get rid of it. So what ends up happening here is it creates a lot of fear in our actions. It creates a lot of, call it self-protection. Self-protection, it causes a lot of self-sabotage when we have judgments against our feelings. So let's just say in a business, in a business thing, let's just say I want to pitch and I want to speak on big stages. So let's say I know somebody who's hosting an event that I could potentially speak at. And I'm going to do the pitch. So essentially, I'm putting two possibilities, maybe more possibilities of really high sensation, like almost like chips, like poker chips. So if the pitch goes well, I could get the gig and I could feel really happy about that. And if the pitch doesn't go well, I'm going to eat that rejection, and that could also be intense. So if I do not have the emotional capacity to handle either side of that, if I couldn't handle being seen on a big stage, right? If I couldn't handle that level of vulnerability, if I couldn't, then I'm going to get in my own way. And if I couldn't handle that flavor of rejection, I'm going to not try so hard, so that I'm going to be bracing against the rejection. Now, on the side that I would get the speaking gig, also, again, I'm putting, and let's say I get up on stage, I could potentially be loved and adored. I could potentially get 100 new clients in at the exact same time, or I could be booed off stage, or I could have a really lukewarm response. Now, all of those things, all of those possibilities, if my body knows that I can't handle that because my house is already too full, I couldn't bring in those big experiences, this is where I'm going to get in my own way. I'm going to procrastinate. I'm going to know that I want to do the thing. My mind is going to be on board to do the thing, but I'm not going to be able to get my body to fucking cooperate. This is what happens. So when I'm working with clients who are scaling their businesses, a lot of times the spinning, the getting stuck, the trying strategy after tactic, the not showing up, the not being able to give up control to actually get our staff to take responsibility for things rather than just like the tasks. A lot of this is work where it's the emotional, it's the judgments against certain emotions. So basically that we have to live, like if I just imagine a number line for a second where it's like 0 in the middle, and the numbers go out positive 1 through 10 and negative 1 through 10. So let's just say if I have the emotional capacity at level, like 2 to negative 2, right? Because you never just get to have only the good side of an experience. It's just not the way that the life works. So if I'm asking life, if I'm saying universe, I want this big abundant life, I want the money, I want the freedom, I want the big audience, I want all these things. And I'm saying, and let's just say that's a level 7, negative 7. So that means I'm going to have to handle negative emotions or harder of feelings. I don't think any emotions are like good or bad or right or wrong. It's just like some are harder to feel. So let's say negative 7 to positive 7. And I only have the capacity for 2, negative 2 to positive 2. Well, that means what I'm asking for, it can't get in the door. Like I can't hold what I'm asking for. And so when people get stuck in their manifestations or they get stuck in their business, oftentimes it's the judgments that they have in the emotional body. All right. So what we do here is we have to learn how to meet ourselves in our sensations with no judgment. And so I teach my clients a little meditation. I'll teach it to you now. It's called like a loving approval meditation. So basically what you're going to do, so let's just say you're having a big feeling. You're going to bring your attention into your body, and you're going to be what's the tricky part here is to get out of your mind, is to get out of the realm of story. It's not to be telling yourself like, oh, I'm feeling this way because so and so did this XYZ. It's you get out of the drama of it, the story of it. And you bring your attention to where you feel this sensation in your body. So maybe you feel like a pit in your stomach, or maybe you feel a tightness in your chest or a weight in your shoulders or whatever. And what you're going to do here, if you're new to this practice, like if you have a pit in your stomach, I would go ahead and touch your stomach. Or if you feel, like if you have a tightness in your chest, you're going to go ahead and meet yourself from the outside there. And this helps your body to be like, we're here, we're paying attention, right? And so when it comes to processing an emotion, the feminine aspect of yourself is going to do the feeling. The heart is going to do the feeling. So the heart's going to feel the sadness or feel whatever's going on. And then the consciousness, the masculine part of you, is going to do the witnessing. So this part of you is going to acknowledge what you're feeling and is going to pay attention while your heart does the feeling, right? And so this is the both sides of the process. And so most people, when they feel a big emotion, they can feel it in their body, but they can't bring their consciousness to it. And so this is where numbing comes in. So if you're doing a lot of, I don't know, I mean, my favorite flavor of numbing used to be drinking, but drinking, drugs, shopping, overworking out, anything that's out of balance, anything that you're doing to numb these sensations. So this is like, so you're drawing your attention to something else. So you're basically abandoning the feminine aspects of yourself. So anyways, so when you have your feeling, when your heart is doing the feeling, right? And then your consciousness is observing your heart doing the feeling. Most of the time, within about 90 seconds, you're going to be able to move that emotion through. Now, sometimes there may be other emotions underneath it. And let's just say in your house that I've described as a hoarder's house, you may have feelings that are from, I don't know, 2002, 1992, 1982, depending on how old you are. And so you may need to process little bits of anger that go all the way back 40 years. So it might not be something that even once you start processing these emotions, like you may be with this practice a while, depending on how cluttered your emotional house is. All right. And I just want to point out that just because you have to go back and feel something similar to what you've already done, it doesn't mean you're doing the same work. The same way, like if I was to clean out my downstairs closet and that closet is now new, nice and shiny, but now I have to go to my upstairs closet. It doesn't mean that my downstairs closet isn't done or I'm doing the same work. I'm just clearing out a new closet. But somehow when we're doing these work on ourselves, we don't see that as much, and it can feel really frustrating, to essentially be processing the same flavors of emotion over and over again. But anyways, so the main thing here is that you want to meet these sensations with loving approval. You want to be like, oh, hey, anger, you're here. I feel you. You're welcome to be here. You're not in any trouble. And you don't want, because when we judge the emotions, we put up new walls and then that emotion gets stuck again, right? So we want to be feeling these emotions free of the judgment. All right. And so that means we have to meet ourselves with loving approval. So I'm going to just kind of wrap this up with a little bow. So when we have judgments in the emotional realm, generally we're going to see ourselves self-sabotaging, not being able to take the actions, knowing what we want to do, but just not being able to like literally do it. And when that's the case, we'll often see clients starting and stopping new strategies, new tactics, hiring new marketing coaches, whatever. And it's basically because it's unconscious, you're basically doing anything that you can do to avoid feeling a certain kind of way. All right. So the way to do that, again, is to take down these judgments around the feelings, let ourselves feel the feelings, meet ourselves there with loving approval. And oftentimes that's going to be a really, really fast process. And then you'll notice that the more you do this kind of work, the bigger, it's like, I just imagine you're starting to clean out a house that's super cluttered. You might be able to get a trash bag or two, but then all of a sudden you get the table cleared off. Now you've got a space to look at things for the drawers, and now you can clear out the drawers. And once you have more space, you can start to, make a line of, bags to be donated in the house, where if your house was too cluttered, you can't really do it, right? So it's the sort of thing where the better you get at it, the more you can move. But when you first get started, it might, one, be difficult to do and take some practice, and two, you may not be moving huge amounts of emotions. So again, it's just something that takes practice. But it really requires us to not judge those feelings as good or bad or right or wrong. So, and how would you know this? Like if you could say to yourself, oh, I'm just not an angry person, or there's whole sets of feelings that you just can't remember the last time you felt that way, I'm probably talking right to you, Okay. So let's talk about judgments on the social level. So on the social level, our judgments are there to keep us safe inside of our community. So listen, when humans were like in very small cities or in tribes or whatever, this kind of rule was fine, because basically everybody was working with the same set of rules. And so you knew how to behave to stay in community, right? So if, like if you were an ancient baker, you knew the role of an ancient baker or banker, it doesn't matter, right? And you could follow those rules and you could maintain your good standing in the community. Today, that's a little harder because, we have TV, the radio, the internet, multiple groups of people, and so these social constructs, can start to again, it's going to create self-sabotage if we're on the wrong side of our judgments around these things. And the way that I notice this is going to be more around actions, words, or behaviors. So let's just say, for example, you might not act the same way in church with your grandparents as you would at the bar with your friends, because the social setting is going to be different. And if you were to act like you did at the bar with your friends, at church with your grandparents, very likely you're going to miff people. People are not going to love that. And if you were to do the opposite, bring all your church vibes to the bar with your friends, they're going to be like, oh, this is a little stick in the mud, huh? Right? And so these judgments are not necessarily bad or wrong. They're always there to keep us safe. They're always there to help us know how to behave. And sometimes they're a holdback. So let me tell you a story here. So I had a client once. She grew up super, super poor, deep South, trailer park. This woman had a master's degree, brilliant thing, super smart, super hardworking, but she couldn't, she was working for like just over minimum wage with a master's degree. And we get into it and I'm talking to her and I'm like trying to figure out like where this energy block is. And basically it came down to her family hated rich people so much. They like had so much resentment and so much separation toward even like middle class people, that she was afraid that if she was to be as successful as she could be, that she would literally lose her people. Her, like, we're talking her real family, like her parents, her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, like the people that she would go do Christmas with. And that fear, I want to point out here, is really justified. Is really, really, this fear makes sense because she is going to be different from her people. All right. And I want to be really tender and gentle with that, because when we are doing a lot of big growings in our business and our money or whatever, oftentimes we're going to play at a very different level than people that we love. And oftentimes big success does come with a cost to relationships. And it usually in real life, I find the play out of this to be really fine and okay. It's often going to look like making new friends and not maybe spending as much time with your old friends, or you get to a point where you're like, these people that I used to be and so have so much in common and be so connected with, now I actually just don't feel as connected to them. And that kind of happens naturally. And for the most part, from what I've experienced working with clients, is once you're on a different wavelength, it's not a big painful breakup. It's just like, we just don't get along as well anymore. We just don't have as much in common anymore. And it's okay. It's not a tragedy. But anyways, on that social level, if we were going to be on the wrong side of our judgment, right? So for her, she had the judgment against those people, rich people, people who wear suits, people who had air conditioned offices, right? And so if she was going to be one of those people, she was going to be on the wrong side of her judgment. And there was a potential social cost for her for that. Now, it ended up working out great for her. She actually just consciously brought this to her family and was like, I'm really feeling this kind of way because I've done all this. Her family let her off the hook. They were like, yeah, lady, like, we're proud of you. Like, we love you. And so she got to have both. So for us, this is the place, the social conditioning. So when we talk about social conditioning, so for many of my clients, social conditioning around like the good girl or the independent woman or the expectations of mother and working mother and stay at home, like this is the place where a lot of that level of thinking needs to be questioned. So for many of my clients, the social conditioning this is like the judgments that we've internalized from the outside world. All right. So we've internalized these things. And it might be things like beauty standards, like, like women are really also like really heavily marketed to around aging, beauty, how we're supposed to be, right? Like this like myth that you can have it all and be in perfect balance and like be a good mom and water the plants and drink enough water and be a sex goddess and make a few $100,000 and run a business and do so much. Like these are social conditionings that we internalize. And what's interesting for women, and so I'm 40, so women in their 40s, 50s, even 30s, is that for us, like the feminism has changed the landscape so fast that the conditioning that we got doesn't match. And so like, let's just say my grandmother, for example, most of her life didn't have a job. She ended up working like later in her life, but for most of her life, she was a stay-at-home mom and that was her job. And my grandfather would go to work and he would leave his paycheck on the dresser every Friday and she was responsible for the bills. And she kept the house and he made the money and that was how that went. Where my mom is, she was raised right in the thick of feminism really coming on, so she, I think, was like the first generation of our family that was able to get a bank account in her own name without a man's signature. right? So my mom was funny. She was always like, you get your own education. You don't want to be depending on a man, right? That was my mom's thing, right? And so then here I am, and I don't live in the same world as my grandmother, but I still had some conditioning from that era. And I don't live in a world where, that my mom grew up in, but I still have some conditioning there. And it's interesting because my daughter has less of this flavor of social conditioning than I did. When I'm working with clients who are, let's say, in their 50s or 60s, the social conditioning is different than if I'm working with clients in their 30s or 40s. And it's just from how we were brought up, formative years. So the social level of judgments, this is the place where there's a ton of bullshit. This is the place where these are ideas that need to be examined, because when we start to bring, let's say, the dichotomy of the good girl and the independent woman, this is a quintessential problematic, and it's for most women, it's both sides. So let's say the good girl, I'm gonna see people pleasing, I'm gonna see over giving, over delivering, I'm gonna see discounting. If she runs a business, this woman has said out loud, oh, this is so easy for me, I shouldn't charge that much about it. Like, it doesn't take me that much time, right? That's what I would hear good girl conditioning. Oh, I put everybody else first, I don't take a paycheck, like, you'd be surprised at how common it is for entrepreneurs who actually really look successful to be paying their team, paying their expenses, and then really just living off the crumbs of their business, right? And so there's that. And then the independent woman does not ask for help. She's got a lot of control issues. She wants things done her way, And so when you start to put both of these two things together, women end up burning out and exhausted. And also self-betraying and all sorts of nonsense, because these two sets of judgments. Now, I want to point out here, in the earlier part of this discussion, we were talking about a single judgment, but these walls now are on both sides, and that judgment will smush us, right? So it's like, well, if I'm not a good girl, if I'm a bad girl, then I'm selfish, then I'm greedy, then I'm wrong and bad. And the other side of the independent woman is, I'm needy, I'm weak, I can't get anything done on my own. It's like, I don't have enough power. So basically, we'll live in this place ping-ponging between the good girl and the independent woman. And so this is one of many examples, but the social conditioning that we deal with, it comes from what part of the world I grew up in the Northeast. Southern women have different conditioning. It depends on what years were your formative years. It depends on how you see yourself. There's a lot of layers of these kinds of judgments that we've internalized. And so what I'll notice there, where these kinds of judgments are much more insidious, and they're often so normal that you may not even be able to see them. I can see them because I've been practicing this for a long time, but a lot of times, clients will default to self-betrayal from their good girl conditioning so fast and so often that she can't even see that she's doing it. Or she'll default to control so fast that she didn't even know she was controlling, that she would have told you she's not controlling. Right? So these social things we have to just look at and question. When it comes to these kinds of judgments, one, there's so many that it would be a lot of work to take them all down. Right? Because all of these little judgments, they come with neural pathways. And so we have to be judicious. I want to just point that out also, because it's like sometimes with mindset work, people are hoping to get the spotless mind. And I'm like, yeah, you'd have to really quit your job and just work on your judgments for a few years if that's what you wanted. It's a lot. So anyways, but these sorts of judgments generally help keep us safe or valued in social settings. So from here, this is the place where, one, we get to question these judgments. And then two, the vast majority of social judgments, nobody's even really expecting these things of us. Normally it's just internalized. Like, let's just say beauty standards, for example, right? Like, I grew up in the 90s. I remember when they called Bridget Jones fat, or Kate Winslet. Do you guys remember when the internet, or not the media, I guess at that point, magazines, TV, called Kate Winslet, who was the literal goddess of Titanic, when they were like, she's so fat? And I was like, right? And as a kid, you internalize that, right? And so, but is it like, so at this point, you guys, I don't know if you've seen me in real life, but I'm like, I'm a size 16. I'm a chubby little thing. And I feel beautiful. But for a long time, I didn't. For a long time, I struggled to feel beautiful, to feel worthy, to feel my own confidence around this, because I was always trying to lose like that pound, well, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, the amount changed as my age changed. But it's like, who said? Who said? It was just internalized, right? And so now for me, I get to be beautiful and fat, beautiful, and all of the things. They're not mutually exclusive, but for a long time for me, they were. And I mean, I'm probably talking, not about necessarily the weight thing, but I'm just saying anyways. So this is how we work with judgments at that level, is we question them and then we take them down. And then we have to, usually at that level, there's a real naughty thrill around being on both sides of a judgment. And so I'll talk a little bit here around the physical level of judgment. So this is the last level that we'll talk about. And honestly, when it comes to money, I'm generally not, I think I mentioned this earlier, I'm generally not seeing people with physical blocks, physical level judgments. Usually those are pretty solid. But basically, let's just say I was to suggest to you, oh yeah, you just walk from here to there, but it takes you along the highway. And you're like, oh, you would walk on the highway? That seems like a bad idea. Yeah, it does. So that would be your judgment kind of being like, no, take the long way. That seems real dangerous, right? And so our physical judgments are just going to be like regard for our physical body. I will say that the judgments that I'll see on the physical level are more my clients feeling bad or feeling guilty for resting, rejuvenating, getting sick, not getting all their work done. I'll see judgments at that level where they'll push their physical body past what's reasonable or healthy in order, to meet the social expectations of productivity. So I do see that. But generally, it's not going to be like, oh, I can't make this money because I'm not willing to. It's just that most of our jobs are not all that physically dangerous. For my clients, I'm sure there are physically dangerous jobs, of course. So, all right. So let's talk about what do we do with these judgments? So with the judgments, the step one is going to be seeing them. And this is the thing that I'm really good at. If you're like, oh my God, she's talking to me, but I can't imagine, then we could potentially talk about working together. But first you have to see them. And oftentimes the easiest way to see your judgments is to look at other people. And again, it's not to judge, you're not judging them. They're just on the wrong side of your judgment. So it's a good way for you to be able to see your own mental structure. So basically you're going to look at other people. Then from there, you can evaluate, does this judgment make sense to me anymore? Does this little mental, this little energy wall, do I want it to stay there? And if you do, then that's fine. And if you're like, no, this is costing me something. This is costing me some power. This is costing me stored emotion. This is costing my peace. I can see that I can't get into action around this. I feel really, yuck around this. All right, well, then you can start to question it. So when it comes to judgments, there's a couple different ways that we can play with these to start to deal with them. So sometimes if it's a small judgment and it's not anchored into your physical safety, you could hop over it. And you could just be like, let's just do selfish and selfless. So most women are conditioned to be selfless, to put other people first, to be a little self-sacrificing, to think about themselves last. And people even talk about that like it's a virtue, which always, I don't know, at this point, I'm always like, eh. But anyway, where to be called selfish, we're probably not going to like that as much. And from there, you could just be like, oh, I'm both. Oh, I'm selfless sometimes. Oh, and I'm selfish sometimes. And for me, being selfish sometimes is actually meaning I'm taking care of myself, which is actually selfless. And I can see that sometimes I've gone too far into selfless and to the point where then I can't take care of myself. And then I'm expecting other people to take care of me, but we didn't really agree on that. So I'm in my shadows and I'm actually being selfish. Right. And so you can start to see that you're both. Right. And anytime that you would say, oh, I'm not angry, or, oh, I'm not selfish, or I'm not this, or I'm not that, you just have a judgment against it. I mean, and that doesn't necessarily mean that judgment needs to come down, but that's not 100%, but that's basically, for a lot of cases, for almost all the conversations that I have when somebody's like, oh, I'm not I don't know, bad person. I'm like, well, you're a good person and a bad person. You're just both, And so this is the place where, for this to really make sense and for you to be able to be gentle with yourself here, you have to be able to do some non-dual thinking. And if you can't do non-dual thinking, if your mind isn't flexible enough for that yet, I would really encourage you to learn that kind of process before you start digging around in your judgments, because once you start to see these judgments, you're going to feel real uncomfortable when you find out that you're on the wrong side of your judgments if you don't have the concept of non-dual thinking down. So this is where I said, this is more of an advanced mindset class. The symbol for non-dual thinking would be the yin yang. right? So it's that ancient symbol. It's like there's like an S in a circle, and then there's two circles, and it's black and it's white. And you can see that there's masculine inside of the feminine, there's feminine inside of the masculine, but together they're whole, right? And so this is where it is. So the non-dual thinking is what opens us up to our wholeness. All right. Then from there, it's just like the same process that you would do to kind of break down a belief. It's like you get your fingerprints on it. You start to see these mental structures. You start to see what they cost you, how they get into your actions. You start to see the outcome of these things. Because really, like when there's judgments, you're going to have a hard time with actions. You're going to have a hard time with follow through on anything that would be on the wrong side of your judgments. So that's the place. So hopping over a judgment will work for small judgments. And generally you'll know that it's done when you feel like a naughty thrill. So like, let's just say if you said, oh, I'm selfless and I'm selfish and I'm both. When you admit that to yourself, because it's the truth, you'll feel probably a naughty thrill around accepting that part of you as real and valid. And you don't have to always be good. Sometimes you're allowed to be bad, or sometimes you're allowed to be greedy and generous, right? All right. So that's a method that I feel comfortable teaching in this masterclass. And if you have judgments that feel stickier, these are things that I work with my clients on. So anyways, let me tell you a little bit. I'm going to just talk for a few more minutes about the ways that I work with clients in case you want to know. All right. So I have three main levels of service. I have courses and I have the podcast, and the podcast is free, and I have YouTube videos for free. And then I have some DIY courses that you can find on my website. And then I have three levels of service where clients work with me. So I have an offer called Cash Flow Queen, and this is an offer for W-2 workers or for business owners, but this is a personal money program. It's 3 months. And basically what we work on is getting your money shit together. So you'll get one-on-one meetings with a cash flow coach. We do 12 money mindset sessions. We work on some nervous system regulation. I have an additional coach for that. And then we do a lot of work on rewiring neural pathways. So Cash Flow Queen is an offer that is on personal money, and it's basically setting you up for a healthy relationship with money for your life. All right. So that's one way that we could potentially work together. That's a 3-month commitment. Then I have Cash Confident, and Cash Confident is for people in sales, people who have their own businesses that are just kind of getting started. Anybody who's already got like an unlimited income potential, right? Or at least way more income potential. It doesn't have to necessarily be unlimited. And what we're working on here is breaking down the judgments that would have us move up social classes, move up financially, right? And so in this offer, we're doing more of the judgment work. We're learning to hold more. We're learning to stretch our emotional range. We're learning to do some of the business aspects, and this is really much more of an implementation offer where the people that are in this program are coming to see me, and they already know a little, they already know some things about marketing, and they already know how to sell, and they already know how to deliver what it is that they do, right? So I'm not doing a lot of like the hard skills, although we can work with clients on the hard skills because clear money paths is part of my expertise, but I'm not teaching on the hard skills, but we're doing the work that we need to do to implement and start to make that big money. And for this, yeah, sometimes I'll work with clients on the momentum of it and being able to hold this. And so oftentimes we're going to see clients make their first and second sales. We're going to see clients kind of come into their first $10,000 months. Like this is going to be that level of work. And then I have my mastermind offers called Limitless Wealth. And this is for women who are already making at least 6 figures and want to scale their businesses. And scaling requires a very different level of mindset, because at this level, we're doing a lot of fine tuning. We're doing a lot of deeper work. We're looking for energetic patterns, emotional patterning. We're really working on the emotional capacity, the nervous system regulation. And so we're doing this at just a really higher level. It's much more deep, right? And so this is the way that I work with the clients. So we have Cash Flow Queen, we have Cash Confident, and we have Limitless Wealth. And then I do offer some private coaching. Generally, I only offer that to people that are in my programs, but that's where we work one-on-one and we do the literal work. Like I don't teach you how to do the work. We more or less do it together. So those are the 4 ways that we can work together. So my sales process goes like this. So if you want to work with me in one of these high touch containers is that you would book yourself a money mapping session, a mind mapping session. And what we're going to do there is you're going to come to that call. You're going to tell me what you want. We're going to go through. I'm going to see where I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I'm going to ask you where your problems are, where where you've gotten stuck in the past. And I'm going to start basically making a mental map of what's going on for you. Right? Where I can start to see, oh, these beliefs are in the way, these judgments are in the way, these emotional patterns are in the way, these energetic, patterns are in the way. And then from there, I'm going to give you, we're going to work on your goals, your problems, your strategies. So you're going to get some practical things. You're going to come away knowing more or less what you need to do, who you need to become, and like just the obstacles that you'll face on your journey. And then some people will decide to work with me and we'll do one of the 3 offers that I just said. And some people will go and do that on their own. But I do like when I'm working with clients like up close and one-on-one and we have a lot of intimate contact, I just like to meet them before we commit to that. I want to make sure that we're a good fit. I want to make sure that my advice gets into you. You can hear it. That's just it. It's not like an interview. It's sometimes people think like it's like I'm evaluating them for if they're good enough, but it's really just like, no, let's just work together this one time before we work together for 6 months or a year and just make sure that you like me. Make sure that you don't really need something else, make sure that I can do, that we can get the results together, I guess is basically it. So anyways, if you go to the show notes, there'll be a link. You can book one of these calls straight on my Calendly. And I mean, you can send me an email or a message on socials if you have questions, but this is really the way that I'm working with clients going forward. And I've always liked doing my own sales calls, but in these are like a coaching session. And then if we want to work together, we'll talk about that after. So anyways, all right. I hope that you got something out of this. I hope that if judgments have been part of what's going on for you, that you can see them. And the last thing I just want to wrap up around judgments is judgment work often yields super fast results in terms of money or changes to business, because most of the time the thing that is like the next step is us taking the action that's required. And when we would have to be on the wrong side of our judgments, we hem and we haw and we do other things instead, and we do a lot of work, but we don't do what's actually required. So when we do the judgment work, oftentimes that action, the result was already there. It was just the action needed to unlock it. So when we can get to the place where we can take the new action, generally the money's already right there. So it's one of those things where if I'm talking to you, then I'm talking to you. All right. I love you so much. Bye.